3 years ago, after moving back from Berlin, I had an experience with local law enforcement. I was living in an old family house at the time, but without a car, so typically, even when I was home, there would be no car out front. One afternoon, as I was going through old memories and moving around what seemed like to be 1,000 boxes, the blinds in my spare room were being shifted to and fro, as I was generally just cleaning out the space. My neighbor, an elderly woman, took it upon herself to be the unofficial neighborhood watch. And so seeing the blinds moving back and forth and no car out front in the driveway, she deduced that my home was being burglarized on a Sunday at noon and called the police. As I continued to clean, I was pretty unaware of what was going on outside of my house, but audible and unfamiliar voices prompted me to pause my cleaning activities and to go outside just to see what was going on. The scene that I encountered when I opened my front door is one that I will never forget. 4 police officers with guns drawn, one pointed directly at me, were surrounding my front porch. "Get out of the house! Hands in the air now!" I froze. Up until this point, I had never actually seen a real live loaded gun this close to me, much less had one pointed in my direction. Now I'm here before you today because I obviously survived that encounter. I was able to collect myself enough to answer questions and prove that I had every right to be in that property. But what if I had not looked like me? What if I had not spoken like me? What if the person who opened the door looked like a thug? Whatever image that pops into your head when I use that word, what if the person who opened the door had not been able to collect themselves in the face of grave danger, confusion, and potentially even death to prove that they had the right to be on that property? What if I had expressed rightful anger for being mistreated by police in my own home? What if I had been a black man instead of a black woman? I raise these questions to illustrate the role that behavior plays as it relates to code switching. As a kid, I was inadvertently forced to learn to code switch, and perhaps in my case, that unintentional education saved my life. Code switching as a concept is really interesting. By definition, it's what happens when people who speak multiple languages alternate between 2 or more, oftentimes within the same phrase or sentence. In a more colloquial sense, code switching is what happens when people reflexively or subtly change the way they express themselves. So for someone like me, and I'm sure many of you all here, I thought up until about 4th grade that y'all was the correct contraction for you all. It was only after some point at around 9 or 10 that I learned that you all was the correct way to address a group of people, and that I should absolutely use you all, not y'all, when addressing important people and situations. As our world continues to be connected through technology of all sorts, apps and the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence, I guess code switching makes a lot of sense as people from different backgrounds continue to come into close contact with one another. But when we look more closely at code switching and who's expected to make the switch, we discover a hidden reality. And that reality is that the expectation of code switching threatens true diversity. My first day of 3rd grade was at a new school, as I had recently been accepted to the gifted program, which meant that I would be bused from my neighborhood school of Westside to Tomoka in the next city over. The year was 1992, and so on the first day of class, I proudly donned my favorite Jodeci pleather new boots and my cross-color short set. To say that I stuck out like a sore thumb would be a grave understatement. My new classmates were in polite pastels and ribbons and bows and Kids Gap and Limited 2 fashions. I knew immediately that if I was going to fit in and make friends, I would have to change more than just a few things. So over the course of the next few years, I learned acutely how to do just that. I stopped wearing my Jodeci boots. I started choosing softer colors as opposed to the bright hip-hop colors and fashions that I had chosen previously. I started listening to Green Day, and I eventually learned how to act like my new classmates and eventual friends. Most importantly, though, I learned how to align myself not just so that I fit in, but so that I was culturally compatible. And I didn't know it then, but this is where I learned how to code switch and how to behave and speak in a way that made me a non-threatening person of color. As our society grapples with police brutality and protests against such violence have become synonymous with big brand ad campaigns and pop culture, it's a person's behavior which indicates whether or not they have learned the language of effective code switching. There have been countless instances in recent history where a person's ability or inability to code switch has meant the difference between life or death. Are you all familiar with Henry Louis Gates Jr.? For those who opt for authenticity, unapologetically deciding to speak with the accents of their homeland or their grandparents, or to wear their hijab, or to say y'all in the boardroom, there are oftentimes very real consequences that can be felt. Consequences like not getting that promotion because the client wants to speak to someone who sounds American, or being jeered at for wearing symbols of pride from your culture, while other people who appropriate that same culture make the pages of Vogue magazine. Or being told by HR or administration that your natural hair is inappropriate for work or school and will need to be changed to avoid disciplinary action. For those who aren't even deciding against code switching because they haven't learned it, the consequences can be even bigger. For the person who's expected to code switch, to exist almost simultaneously in 2 or 3 different worlds, constantly presenting a slightly edited version of self, the pressure can be immense. But what if there was just one world where we could all be our true selves? Instead of the brand of diversity which purports that minorities are acceptable provided they behave in a specific way, what about a truer sense of diversity, where people are praised for their uniqueness and the cultural capital they bring to places and situations as opposed to being disciplined or shamed for it? What about an acceptance of different speech patterns, even within our own American lexicon, so that when a person says the word y'all, we appreciate what that might mean about their heritage or their upbringing as opposed to what we think it means about their level of intelligence?